everyone, my name is Professor Warren, and today we're going to be talking about academic integrity and plagiarism. Now, obviously, these are things that I hope none of you will have to worry about, but because this is, an English course, and oftentimes people accidentally do these things without realizing, I just want to cover the basis and have everyone on the same page when it comes to what is academic integrity and what is plagiarism. So, before we continue though, I want to give some quick examples of plagiarism. So, we're going to watch this first video. This is Radiohead's Creep, and then we're going to watch a second music video by Lana Del Rey. And I want you to listen to this video, then listen to Lana Del Rey, and then we're going to talk about it. So just listen. Look for maybe similarities or anything that sounds similar. Now again, this is the original music video. This came out before Lana Del Rey. So let's listen to this one. We'll only listen for a few seconds.
Look you in the eye, you're just like an angel, skin makes me cry.
Okay, so that was a little bit of Radiohead's Creep. Now let's listen to Lana Del Rey's, and it's called Get Free. So, did you hear any similarities? Did it sound too close to one another? This is a question that I present to students, and I'll ask you guys as well in the discussion board what it is that you think. But, did Lana Del Rey plagiarize Radiohead? And if so, well, what was plagiarized? Now, I'll ask you guys, because again, it is important to note that Lana Del Rey did settle with Radiohead out of court for a settlement. So when Radiohead tried to sue Lana Del Rey, they didn't take it to court, they just kind of settled out of court. But what do you think? Is this plagiarism? Now, I'm going to present you with another two pieces of evidence. Maybe two songs that maybe for these two songs you might have said no, maybe it's not plagiarism. I usually have 50-50 when it comes to did Lana Del Rey plagiarize Radiohead. Let's take another example of two songs that may be closer together. So let's look at those ones and see if it's plagiarism. So, the first one is Mary Jane's Last Dance by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. So again, this is the original. I not only want you to pay attention to the way the music sounds, but now I want you to pay attention to the lyrics. So let's look at that really quick.
She grew up in an Indiana town, had a good
Alright, so again, you kind of heard the song, hopefully you read some of the lyrics, right? So keep in mind the message, right, or the lyrics of the song, and let's look at, apparently, the plagiarized version, which is by Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's their song Danny California. So let's listen to this one together.
Getting on in the state of Mississippi. Papa was a copper and the mama was a hippie. In Alabama, she was swinging a hammer. Price you gotta pay when you break the panorama. She never knew that there was anything more than gold. What in the world does your company take me for? Black bandana, sweet Louisiana, robbing on a bank in the state of Indiana. She's a runner, rebel and a stunner. Come to me everywhere saying, baby, what you gonna? Looking down the barrel of a hot metal 45. Just another way to survive.
Okay, so what about these two now? Now again, I'll ask your opinion in the discussion board, but do you think that there's more similarities here than maybe with the previous example? And if so, what makes you think that this is or isn't plagiarism? Now we're gonna do two more, and I think those ones are pretty obvious that, one plagiarized the other. So let's look at that one. But I've showed you at least one example of one that is a little bit iffy. Another example where, okay, I think that we maybe can see some similarities, right? And now let's see another final example of ones that are pretty obvious. So this one is the original. This is Chuck Berry, one of the king, in my personal opinion, of rock and roll. So let's listen to Chuck Berry real quick. This is Sweet Little 16. We're only listening for a little bit.
They're really rocking in Boston and Pittsburgh, PA, deep in the heart of Texas and round the Frisco Bay, all over St. Louis and down in New Orleans. All the cats wanna dance with Sweet Little 16.
Okay, so that's Sweet Little 16, and now let's look at the pretty obvious plagiarized version, which is the Beach Boys' Surfing USA.
If everybody had an ocean across the USA, then everybody'd be surfing like California. You'd see them wearing their baggies.
So I think that we probably can, come to a conclusion that yes, probably the Beach Boys maybe borrowed or took more than maybe the Red Hot Chili Peppers did or Lana Del Rey. So let's talk about, what is plagiarism? Because again, looking at these examples, it may be hard to pinpoint what it is. So let's talk about it. Whether, whatever fancy word you want to attribute to plagiarism, obviously, at the end of the day, the most simple answer is that plagiarism is theft. And that's whether you intentionally or unintentionally do something, right? So if, for instance, you're writing a paper and you borrowed information, but you didn't cite it correctly or you didn't attribute it correctly, that's still plagiarism, right? And the university looks at that the same way, whether you intentionally ripped an entire news article and used it as your paper, or if you accidentally just cited someone incorrectly or didn't know to cite someone that you borrowed from. Plagiarism, down to its nuts and bolts, is theft, whether you intentionally do it or you unintentionally do it. So, this is why we cite, because at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that if you're borrowing from someone or you're heavily inspired by someone, you should give credit where credit is due, right? That wasn't your original ideas or thoughts or opinions or expressions, so you should cite those and give credit where credit is due. Now, failing to acknowledge someone's work, that's what we call plagiarism, when you're trying to pass off something as your own, and it's not your own. That's why, me personally as a professor, I won't immediately take you to the university and say, look at this student plagiarizing. I always talk to students unless it's very deliberate, like you took word for word an entire essay, right? But if I see that you're trying to be transparent and you're like, hey, so-and-so said this, and you give me a quote, but maybe you don't put the in-text citation correctly, then that's when I would just talk to you and say, hey, right, we talked about how to cite, make sure you cite correctly. And by the time of watching this video, usually by this point we haven't covered citation. We will cover citation, but for our purposes now, just be clear and open where you got that information, okay? That's all I ask for. So, let's continue really quick. Ooh. So, what needs to be cited? These are all the things that need to be cited. So the first one is direct quotes, both entire sentences and phrases. So if you're directly quoting someone, which there are a few exceptions we'll talk about here in a second, but the general rule of thumb, if you're quoting someone, you need to cite it. You need to put a citation at the end of your paper in your works cited and in the actual body of your paper. Paraphrases. So again, paraphrases, which we'll talk about here in a sec, it's when you take somebody's original work and you put it in your own words, right? So if you were to tell me paraphrasing a quote from James Baldwin, you need to, or summarizing a work of James Baldwin, you need to cite that, okay? Because again, the way that I remember how to do it is if you didn't know the information before you looked at a source, then you need to cite it. Words or terminology specific to, those are called neologisms, to an author's research, theories, or ideas. So if somebody comes up with a word that didn't exist originally, and that's part of their sort of argument, their research, what have you, then you need to cite that. So again, if they come up with a unique word, make sure to cite that. Use of an author's argument or their line of thinking. So again, if you are inspired by an author's argument, right, maybe they make an argument about healthcare discrimination, don't just take what they use as their argument and pass it off as yours. Cite them. And usually, even if you do utilize their argument and cite them, you usually want to make some sort of addition to their argument or maybe refute a point in their argument. But if you're inspired by the way someone constructs their argument, just cite them. Historical, statistical, or scientific facts. Here, usually you need to cite it. There are some exceptions. We'll talk about them in a second. But on the safe side, even if you don't know whether to cite or not cite it, it's always good to just cite it to be safe. Graphs, drawings, or other such collections of information. So again, if you get a graph, a picture, what have you, that came from an artist or a researcher, you need to cite that. Articles or studies. So again, if you pull out articles or studies, obviously it's not your original work, you need to cite it. And any images, YouTube videos, songs, and original artwork. So again, all sort of the artistic expressions, they still need to be cited as well. So these are all the things that need to be cited. So as I said, there are some things that you don't have to cite, which is things that fall under common knowledge. So, for instance, if you were to write in your paper things that the general public knows, like, hey, the sky is blue, or oxygen has an atomic number of 8, you don't need to cite that. That's basic human knowledge. Some other things that sort of fall into that category are things like proverbs, axioms, or sayings, such as the one I have here, a stitch in time saves 9. Common sayings that everyone knows, you don't need to cite those. And oftentimes, things like proverbs, we've sort of, have lost the original, speaker for that proverb. They're usually things that have been passed on for generations. Well-known quotations. So again, never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. That's a very well-known quote. You don't have to cite that. Other things that you don't need to cite are things such as, hey, Thomas Edison invented the phonograph, Starry Night was painted by Vincent van Gogh. However, if you ever come across an instance in your paper where you're like, is this common knowledge, or is this something I need to cite, I always fall under the umbrella of, if you're still unsure, it's always good to find a source and cite it really quick, especially if it's something like, hey, should I cite that Starry Night was painted by Vincent van Gogh? It doesn't take an extensive amount of research, and, no one's going to question you if you, get a cite from, say Wikipedia on Hey Starry Night was by Vincent Van Gogh. It's a pretty inconsequential citation, but just for all intents and purposes, if it's common knowledge, you don't have to cite it, but if you're still unsure, right, there's maybe that 5% of you that's like, I don't know, just go ahead and cite it. No harm. So, there's one other thing that we have to talk about. It's called self-plagiarism. Self-plagiarism is essentially how it sounds. It is when you take anything that you already done, such as older, already graded work, and you pass it off as if it's something new without citing yourself. Yes, you can plagiarize yourself. Now, from the outside looking in, that may seem very dumb, but there's a reason why the university takes self-plagiarism very seriously. One of the reasons is it's the antithesis of what a research paper is, right? Researchers are people that go out there and, find new knowledge. They, create new discourse in different academic fields. And what would our world look like if researchers just copied and pasted and regurgitated the same information that they've already collected over and over and over and over again, right? Nothing new would ever come out. So, that's one of the reasons. Self-plagiarism prevents new knowledge from being aggregated. Another reason why self-plagiarism is bad is sometimes your own words don't belong to you. So what do I mean by that? Since I teach freshman English composition, there have been times where students tried to pass off a past history paper from high school. Oftentimes, public education in high school, they often don't teach you how to cite information in MLA or APA. So what if it was okay in high school, but for college, right, you forgot that you quoted someone or you paraphrased information from another source? That's going to really hurt you. So, don't do that. This is my long and short of it. And then the last one, you're not growing as a writer. So again, if you keep using the same work you've already turned in and got a grade for, you're not growing as a writer. Why are you spending money in college? You're supposed to be learning something, and English composition is English 101, 110, what have you. It's all meant to get you to that college writing standard, and so you're not growing as a writer if you just keep regurgitating the same information. If you ever do want to recycle a quote or maybe a little snippet from a previous paper, all you have to do is ask your instructor. Sometimes they'll let you do that, and sometimes they won't. So if there is maybe a small portion of your own paper you want to cite yourself that you actually wrote, just ask your professor to see if they'd be okay with that. I personally will not allow you to use older work and submit it as if it's new. The only way you may be able to do that is, say for instance, you wrote a paper about the causes behind inflation. And say for my paper, you are like, okay, when I previously wrote that paper, I argued this, this, and this. Well, I kind of want to do the same thing, but I want to give completely different reasons as to what's causing inflation. That I could maybe let you do, because you're essentially creating a different argument. And that would be really the extent to what I would allow. So don't recycle old work, and if there is something you want to use, you just need to talk to me, okay? Awesome. One other thing that you can plagiarize other than people's words is their form and content. So instead of just copying words word for word or phrases, right, you can think, some other things that are considered plagiarism is when you change keywords. So say for instance you took a quote, you pasted it in your paper, and say the quote started with thus, and you changed it to thusly, right? Or someone wrote in the quote smaller and you changed it to, I don't know, tiny. Just because you change words, right, to a synonym, does not make it your own work, right? That doesn't make it your own work. That also goes into this idea of changing words from past tense to pretense. So again, if it said Susie ran to the store and you changed it to, Susie runs to the store, you're still taking it. You're just sort of changing that keyword, but it's essentially keeping the same meaning. And that's not your work. Rearranging sentences. So again, if you rearrange a sentence, so if you took a paragraph and you moved the first sentence to the middle of the paragraph and the last sentence to the top of the paragraph, again, the words are still word for word. Just because you move sentences around doesn't mean that you've changed it, right? That you're paraphrasing. That's not paraphrasing. Or using an author's form, so the way in which they write, you can always be inspired by the way that authors form their writing, but if you're deliberately sort of copying that sort of template, that format, and you're not at least crediting the author, that would be considered plagiarism. So, let's go a little bit more into this. Paraphrasing and summary. Now again, they're very similar, but they are different. Paraphrasing is usually you're taking a chunk of a text and you're putting that particular chunk in your own words, whereas a summary is you're taking in the entire text and you are putting it in your own words. So both of them, you're putting it in your own words, but paraphrasing is usually just a small portion of the text, whereas summarizing is usually the entire thing. So, paraphrasing. You're condensing, clarifying another author's ideas, while also providing credibility to your own argument or analysis. Paraphrasing must have in-text citations because they include information that is not your own. So, for instance, this person paraphrases from Johnson, mirror neurons may be connected with empathy and imitation in human beings. And again, they provide an in-text citation. Summaries, you're boiling down a big chunk of information into its basic argument, its essential point. So again, if you're summarizing a book, you usually will tell us, hey, what was the main argument, right, or the main point, the main gist of the book, what was some evidence provided, or what was some key points, and then how did it conclude, right? So here, this person summarized Jones, 2010, argued that electronic medical records make care for patients more reliable and thorough. The author cited many instances of medication, mismanagement, and lack of treatment records that could have been avoided with consistently applied EMRs. The evidence in this article was persuasive, but Jones did not address the training and implementation costs of such systems. So again, they took that huge, maybe, portion of text, and they gave us, hey, here's what it's about, here's some of the evidence they provided, and, did I find it to be a good argument, a good point, or a good article. And then quotes. Very straightforward. Quotes are you are taking word for word, right, what somebody said, but like we can see here in the example, you're putting it in quotes and then you're giving me an in-text citation. So here's some paraphrasing examples, because what I found is that students, especially transitioning from high school to college, think that paraphrasing is changing keywords, right? Because you may have been surprised when I said, hey, if you change keywords to synonyms, that's still plagiarizing. This is what I mean by paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is you literally are reading it, you're digesting it, and then you're rephrasing it in your own words. This helps to understand, or it helps me to understand that you understood the material, as well as it goes to show that you did grasp the material and you're able to rephrase it. That's a good step in critical thinking. So, here is the original. It's that first line here. Differentiation as an instructional approach promotes a balance between a student's style and a student's ability. Differentiated instruction provides the student with options for processing and internalizing the content and for constructing new learning in order to progress academically. Here, the first example shows a bad paraphrase. Let's look at this one. Differentiation is a way to encourage equality between the approach and talent of the student. So let's look here. First off, they start the exact same way. Is as and, essentially the same thing. An instructional approach that it promotes a balance between a student's style and a student's ability. And here it says a way to encourage equality between the approach and talent of the student. Again, it's saying the exact same thing, but they changed out some keywords for a synonym. And then if we keep going, right, differentiated instruction provides the student with options for processing and internalizing the content. And then here, this type of instruction gives students different ways to deal with and grasp information. Again, the term grasp information, the synonym, internalizing the content. Same thing. Now, this second example, this would be a good paraphrase. Teachers use differentiated instruction to help students learn, allowing the teacher to cater lessons to the way each student learns and each student's skill. Again, this person did not know that information, so they made sure to in-text cite Thompson. However, do those two different pieces of text sound similar? No. They're definitely completely different, but in example 2, it's still, getting to the point of what that original piece of text is saying, right? That differentiation is an instructional tool that teachers use in order to help students learn, right? And here, that's saying the same thing, but in a new way, and that is what paraphrasing is. All in all, everything that we've covered, as long as you're transparent with me, I'm totally fine. And what I mean by being transparent is that you attempt to cite your sources and you cite them correctly, and you're responsible for sourcing your work. Now again, we will be learning how to cite information in this course, as well as, the first time that we start citing, we'll do some practice in class. I definitely am not going to, hound you on it, right? But definitely for the final drafts of all of your papers, you need to make sure your citations are correct and your works cited page is correct. As long as you're doing that, you're good with me. Now, again, if you're ripping huge chunks, and it's obviously word for word, or you're doing that changing certain keywords, right, then that's going to be a problem. But as long as you're clear and you're open and you're saying, hey, look, I'm being upfront, this isn't my work, I am, utilizing this person to help justify my argument, or I'm just being honest that, hey, right, some of this information that's in my paper, most of it's mine, some of it's not, that I've borrowed. As long as you're transparent, you cite your sources correctly, you're good with me. Alright? Awesome. So this is just a small video, watch it on your own, we won't watch it here, but it goes more into sort of what we talked about, and it wraps it up in a nice 2-minute video. This is from UNC's tutoring center. So, the writing formats that exist. So these are the formats in which you cite, and each of these formats have different, not only formatting paper requirements, so the way the paper looks, but the way that you cite information. There's MLA, there's APA, CMS, AP, AMA, Turabian style, and Harvard style. I put these here, but really for English 100, 110, we're using MLA, which is from the Modern Language Association. And if you're getting your degree, if you're going to be in the degree fields of the humanities, that includes theater, English language, and literature, you're likely going to be citing your sources in MLA. We'll have a whole lecture on what MLA is. I'm just introducing this to you now, so it doesn't come up in the future. But the next big popular one is APA. That one's from the American Psychological Association. So if you're going to be in psychology, education, the social sciences, you'll be citing an APA. Alright everyone, and that sort of concludes our lesson today on plagiarism. Now again, don't worry too much about citation. We'll be doing citation in Unit 3, when you'll be required to do those, what you may have saw, those in-text citations, and a works cited page, which we'll talk about when we get to Unit 3. For right now, just make sure that you're paraphrasing, right? You're not changing keywords, you're taking information, synthesizing it, and putting it into your own words. As well as, when you're quoting, make sure that you explicitly state, right, who you're quoting, where it's from, until we get to the point of citation in Unit 3. So, hopefully this helped to clear up any maybe misconceptions you had, or some things that were unclear when it comes to what really is plagiarism and academic integrity. As always, if you have any questions, you can put a question in our Q&A forum, or you can send me an email. Although putting in the Q&A forum likely would be the better choice, considering that, if you have a question, likely somebody else has the same question. So, hopefully you learned something, as well as I can't wait to see your post in the discussion post about what you thought about the songs. Do you think that they were plagiarized? What may be in there do you consider to be plagiarism? And yeah, I'm totally interested in hearing, especially because I picked songs that, at least the first few, I picked those that I really enjoyed. So, have a great rest of your day. I'll see you in class, and have a wonderful day.